Thanks for joining us. I'm Megan Roberts. Nearly all Indigenous governments in the Northwest Territories signed on to a big deal last week. It unlocked $375 million in federal and private funding for conservation over 10 years. Now they'll need to make decisions about how and where the money is used. The CBC's Leanie Lambrink joins us now with more. So Leanie, remind us what this deal is all about.
More than 20 Indigenous governments signed this deal last week. It's called NWT Our Land for the Future. Basically, it's a promise to work together to use $375 million for conservation initiatives. $300 million comes from the federal government, $75 million comes from private donors.
Okay, so we don't know exactly what the money will be used for yet in terms of specifics, but I understand we have a pretty good idea, Leanie.
Yeah, so the agreement says its primary purpose is to establish Indigenous protected and conserved areas. And each Indigenous government has already named areas where they want to do more stewardship. The agreement says it could protect 17% of land in the NWT by the end of its 10 years. The secondary focus is conservation-related activities that don't have to do with a protected area. Guardian programs, climate research, ecotourism, and some land use planning are all types of things that could be funded.
There are a lot of people and governments involved in this agreement. So how do they all decide where the money gets used and who gets to make that decision?
So the agreement lays out a whole governance process for this. Basically, there are a number of roles that now need to be filled. Directors who get to sit on a governance committee appear to get the most say in what happens with the money. There can be up to 7 of them. Indigenous partners get to name 5. Private donors get to name 2. They will manage the trust from which the money will flow and decide what activities will qualify for funding. Each Indigenous government who signed the agreement also gets to name a partner. That partner sits at a partner's table. They'll meet once a year. They're tasked with more of an oversight role, making sure the agreement's purpose, vision, and objectives are carried out. Those will help guide conversations about where to put the money. The vision is to support Indigenous-led stewardship of land and water, and also to help Canada meet its goal to protect 30% of its land by 2030. The objectives are to preserve biodiversity, support cultures, build capacity, and contribute to healthy economies. The agreement says supporting Indigenous guardians will be central to these goals. Now that the agreement is signed, Indigenous governments will name their partners, and those partners will all meet next year.
And I'm sure we'll follow it up when that happens. Leanie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
As COP29 enters its second week, delegates to the climate conference have their work cut out for them. UN officials are calling for strong action to help developing nations deal with climate change, but little progress was made last week. Susan Ormiston has more.
Week 2 of the United Nations Climate Conference began with blunt words.
Let's cut the theatrics and get down to real business.
An apt critique of week 1 at COP29 echoed by others.
This has been one of the worst first week of a COP in my 15 years of attending.
The so-called finance COP is tasked with squeezing hundreds of billions of dollars out of the world's wealthiest countries to help developing nations adapt to climate change and move away from fossil fuels.
We don't have any clarity on the amount of finance that developing countries will be provided and who is going to contribute to that pot.
Part of the problem, with a new Trump administration on the way, he says U.S. leadership has been neutered.
Many of the rich world wanting to hide behind Trump's administration, so not wanting to come forward on the delivery of the much needed finance.
COP29 comes in a year of savage storms, crippling drought, and deadly floods. Yet oil and gas production is on the rise, and so are emissions. Baku's towers of flame, as they're called, are homage to its oil and gas reserves, and the host country, Azerbaijan, is under pressure.
How many oil and gas deals have Azerbaijan done this year while leading these talks?
He doesn't answer directly.
The world is moving on the direction to increase the green energy, green transition.
There's still hope that we can land a transformational deal here.
Canadian Caroline Brouillette is ready for the fight.
It is going to include long nights, but really we cannot afford to fail.
COP itself is under scrutiny after a public critique by some former UN leaders and climate experts said the annual conference can no longer deliver change fast enough and should be overhauled. So a lot is riding on this week's outcome. Susan Ormiston, CBC News in Baku, Azerbaijan.
Canada Post workers continued their strike today, keeping most mail service at a standstill. The holiday season is around the corner, and Ottawa says it's not planning back-to-work legislation. The CBC's Sam Sampson looks at the impact so far.
How's everybody doing?
Solidarity is keeping this Edmonton crowd warm. Different local unions all showed up at this weekend rally to support striking staff at Canada Post.
We have members who are using the food bank, and that's not a Christmas.
The strike has shut down mail delivery across Canada, yet the federal government insists it'll stay out of this labor dispute. The Labour Minister says he's not considering back-to-work legislation. Though Ottawa did use it when Canada Post workers hit picket lines in 2018, and in 2011, and in 1997.
I think what makes the most difference is that the Liberal government is not in a position right now to table back-to-work legislation. There isn't enough necessarily support. The NDP have declared they're not going to support it.
But politics did not stop Ottawa from intervening in recent strikes. It used legislation to force railway workers and BC port workers back on the job. Some suggest Canada Post might be a different story. It's running a deficit worth billions of dollars, and most Canadians don't rely on the postal system like they did years ago, meaning Ottawa may not be feeling the same pressures it did with other national strikes this year.
There's no need to intervene. It is not the railroads, which is completely essential. It's not the Port of Vancouver. It is not the Port of Montreal, which truly will bring down the Canadian economy if they shut down for any period of time.
But others say Ottawa will act.
It will say that the strike is having a significant impact on the national economy, and that will be probably their main justification for ordering an end of the strike.
Some Canadians do still need the postal service, including those living in rural areas and charities that rely on mail-outs to get big holiday donations. The Calgary Dream Centre, for example, uses that money to help house and treat people with addictions.
Not being able to send Christmas cards or get Christmas packages on time is frustrating and is a delay. This is a matter of life or death, really, for some people.
Canada Post and the union have an agreement where, in light of labor action, it will continue to deliver some government benefit checks, like old age security. But that might be the only mail going out for a while. On Sunday, Canada Post said it and the union were far apart at the bargaining table. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Edmonton.
The timing of Canada Post's strike is proving to be difficult for artisans and small business owners in the Northwest Territories. The holiday season is usually their busiest time of year. Craft fairs like the one at Welladay School over the weekend can bring in business, but many of them rely on Canada Post to ship online orders, including Delo-based skincare brand Naturally Dene.
We're going to have to ask some customers to wait until after the strike for sure. We're not going to be able to ship out to some customers, but if there's a means that we can get them locally and through our NWT communities, then that's something that we're going to have to be creative with. But for sure, we're going to be losing business with the strike.
Fraser Erasmus plans to use NWT Airlines to ship within the territory during the strike. She's hoping she can make up for some of that lost business with local sales. The Northwest Territories government has created a camp to help house Yellowknife's homeless population. It says it can accommodate up to 30 people at a time. It'll include counseling and cultural programs. Drinking and illicit drug use are not allowed. The camp is located on the Ingram Trail outside of city limits. It has dorm-style cabins heated by wood stoves, heated outhouses, showers, and a kitchen. A nonprofit company called NWT Integration and Community Services will operate it. The camp comes as shelters in the city are at full capacity. A 26-year-old Yellowknife man pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting a minor. Bradley Bolio appeared virtually at Yellowknife Supreme Court this morning. He pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting a minor in 2021. Bolio is currently serving a 3.5-year sentence for a fatal head-on collision. That happened last summer near High Level, Alberta. A woman was declared dead at the scene, and a man suffered serious injuries. Bolio's next court appearance is set for December 16th. The RCMP has reportedly disrupted an Iranian plot to assassinate Irwin Cotler, a former justice minister and human rights activist who's been a strong critic of Tehran. Last month, officials informed him that he faced an imminent threat of assassination from Iranian agents. Cotler has been under RCMP protection since the Hamas attacks on Israel last year. Olivia Stefanovich has the details.
Calling out this moral evil.
Human rights advocate Irwin Cotler is well known as an outspoken critic of the regime in Tehran.
Iran is basically a threat to international peace, a threat to the rules-based international order.
He even warned of Iran's attacks against political dissidents outside its borders on CBC News Network.
There's transnational repression, and increasingly of late we're seeing not only transnational repression engineered by Iran, but transnational assassinations.
Now, the 84-year-old says he himself was targeted. As first reported by the Globe and Mail, the former justice minister says he was informed last month of a plan by agents of Iran to kill him within 48 hours, an attempt ultimately foiled by the RCMP.
This is at a level of horrific that is unspeakable.
Horrible, scary.
This is so despicable, and it shows how serious is foreign interference in our life in Canada.
In the House of Commons, MPs condemned the death threats orchestrated by the Iranian regime.
I have the confidence in our police forces to be able to handle this, and as a person who's dealt with threats directly myself.
Cotler was not available for an interview, but told Radio Canada he's been under 24-hour RCMP protection for well over a year, ever since the Hamas attack on Israel last year, in which the militants killed hundreds and took hundreds more hostage.
It's surprising because Irwin Cotler is a very prominent name. It's not surprising because it is consistent with past allegations concerning Iran.
This defense expert says Cotler was likely targeted by Iran to send a message to others who criticize the regime.
But for all of the Chinese Canadian, Iranian Canadian, Indian Canadian activists and human rights militants and so on who don't have the visibility of Mr. Cotler, there is a need to reach out to them to better understand their needs, to better understand the threat level.
The Globe reports the threat level faced by Cotler has been reduced. However, Cotler could not confirm that part of the report. It's also not known whether suspects have been arrested or if they fled the country. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
After getting badly hurt in a car crash, an Ontario man took on the other driver and one of the country's biggest insurance companies in court, only to find himself under attack, he says, by key medical witnesses for the insurer. Rosa Marcatelli has the story.
John Graw's life changed in a flash 7 years ago when a driver traveling in the wrong lane hit him head on.
Some things developed over time, but a headache, confusion.
Unable to work and facing mounting bills, he says, Grawl went to court for compensation, taking on the other driver and his insurance company, Aviva. The judge accepted that he suffered a traumatic brain injury after multiple doctors backed that up. Yet one of the medical experts hired by Aviva testified that Grawl's brain injury had resolved, and the other said Grawl never had a brain injury at all.
I couldn't believe it.
Neither could the judge in the case, who called both of those medical experts out, saying neuropsychologist Dr. Lawrence Friedman had behaved like a bias-paid expert, trying to hide real and significant evidence from the court. He also called out the other expert, neurologist Dr. Sarah Mitchell, for her alarming lack of attention to detail and for contradicting her own medical opinion when she testified that Grawl's vacant stare wasn't a red flag.
If they have a vacant stare,
despite saying the opposite in a CBC interview a few years earlier. That case launched a wider go public investigation that found more than 24 other injury cases where medical experts hired by insurance companies were called out by the court. Medical experts have a duty to serve the court, not the side that hires them.
I think it's important that the public knows the quality of the medical evidence that is used in courts is a big concern.
She and Grall's lawyer say that needs to change when doctors have a record of reprimands.
These experts should have no role in our judicial system.
The Grall decision was appealed by the other side, but in the end, both sides came to a settlement. Aviva tells Go Public it expects its experts to be fair and objective. As for those two doctors in the Grall case, Dr. Friedman didn't answer Go Public's questions. Dr. Mitchell says she stands by what she said in court and takes seriously her obligation to provide an unbiased expert opinion, saying that seemingly contradictory testimony was taken out of context. Rosa Marcatelli, CBC News, Calgary.
Donations to the War Amps have a lasting impact on amputees. Today, your support gives them the artificial limbs and resources they need for everyday activities and learning to live with amputation. Having access to our essential programs helps amputees prepare for tomorrow on their road to independence. The War Amps is committed to improving the quality of life for Canadian amputees, but this wouldn't be possible without you. To learn how your donation helps, visit waramps.ca.
Release him.
Why?
Well, I would say it's extremely bad form to arrest your new boss.
This man is actually in my custody.
What did he do?
Well,
Did you hear that? I'm being charged with,
This ranch isn't going down. Not on my watch.
The dirty underbelly of capitalism is exploitation.
They're making more money than they have ever made in the history of the music business.
We have generation after generation of us not seeing a fair piece of the pie.
How do we keep the money from Black music in Black people's hands?
Never got paid, never got their due, never got their acknowledgement, never got their awards, never got their flowers.
Don't miss Paid in Full, a 3-part series. Watch free on CBC Gem.
They reported a shipment of cocaine stolen 2 weeks ago.
We all have our vices, Detective.
Oh, you find that surprising?
Dust, noise, and lowlifes.
Bloody hell.
Every week, the issues that matter to Canadians.
Cost of living hurts everybody.
Connecting politics to people.
We are not going back.
Join me for Rosemary Barton Live.
Halifax police say the death of a Walmart employee last month is not considered suspicious. A 19-year-old woman was found dead inside a large walk-in oven at one of the company's stores. The woman's mother, who also works at Walmart, made the discovery. The police investigation concluded that there is no evidence of foul play. Nunavut will be testing the National Alert Ready system on Wednesday. The Nunavut Department of Emergency Management says the message will clearly indicate that it's a test. The alert will come through cell phones, radio, and TV at about 2 p.m. Eastern Time and last about 30 seconds. The GN is partnering with the RCMP's V Division. It says the test is to make sure partners have the necessary tools to keep Nunavummiut safe. The Yukon's Ombudsman Office wants to be able to start its own investigations. The office is an independent body that investigates complaints into how the Yukon government serves the public and makes recommendations based on its findings. The Deputy Ombudsman says she sees things all the time that her office could look into, but they have to wait for somebody to file a complaint first.
The Yukon is the only jurisdiction in Canada that does not, where the ombudsman, the territorial ombudsman, does not have this power. We also did some research around the world, and as far as we can tell, we're the only ombudsman's office in the world. I don't want to say that with certainty because, of course, there could be some that we don't know about, but based on our research, we're the only jurisdiction in the world that does not have this power.
The Ombudsman Office gets hundreds of complaints a year. It asked the Yukon government this spring for changes to the Ombudsman Act. The Arctic Winter Games International Committee is reviewing the age limit for its figure skating competition. The limit could potentially drop from 17 to 14. The CBC's Carl Cardinal has that story.
The AWG committee is currently working with Sport for Life on a review of each competing sport. Marielle Tiputer is the chair of the engagement committee for AWG. She says that one of the recommendations they made is to drop the figure skating age limit from 17 to 14, but no decision have been made yet.
Between 12 to 17-year-olds is the current age group. That can be a very wide gap, putting a 12-year-old on the ice competing with a 17-year-old.
Jenna McLaughlin is a figure skating coach with the skating club of Nunavut. She says her club has a shorter season, less hours of ice time, and less access to expert coaching than other regions. In 2024, the club had 2 athletes that met the requirement to compete.
You have to land an axle, which is a very difficult jump. And so because we have fewer resources here, our skaters tend to be older when they achieve that skill. And so reducing the age limit is likely to mean that we'll have fewer skaters that are ever able to compete at the Arctic Winter Games.
The committee is currently collecting feedbacks. Their goal is to have a complete report by June 2025. Carl Cardinal, CBC News, Iqaluit.
There's a new push to keep girls playing organized sports. A report released today says many girls still believe that sports are for boys, and more must be done to ensure girls get the benefits of participation. Jamie Strachan reports.
As the weather cools, the game is moved inside for this girls' soccer team. For Bridget Byrne, it's one of many sports she enjoys.
It's really fun to play sports because you can have good teammates and you can play and make new friends.
Her coach agrees.
I always want to create a safe environment where they can come out, try new things. I want to be that role model in their life like I had when I was growing up.
A new report says 63% of girls 6 to 18 participate in organized sports, higher than ever, and only slightly behind boys. And fewer are leaving sport as they get older.
For the first time, we're seeing that the dropout rate between girls and boys is actually starting to close and look more comparable, which is a real positive sign of progress.
Participation begins to fall as girls get older, quitting because of a number of factors, including many girls thinking that sports are for boys. But that's changing.
They want to be who they are, and they see that now on TV.
Olympian Marnie McBean says a new professional sports landscape is giving young girls something to shoot for.
You watch the PWHL, it's a physical sport. It's amazing. It doesn't have to be dumbed down to be girls' sport.
Take the shot, save this, score!
So the future, I think, is really exciting.
I have days where I'm like super happy and my teammate might be struggling.
Canadian basketball star Kia Nurse says it's important for young girls to know they can be feminine and sporty.
We tend to not put ourselves in boxes and say you can only look one certain way. We try to give ourselves an opportunity to show that you can be your most authentic self, because that's when you're going to play your best.
Young athletes are increasingly cutting through the noise and enjoying the game.
Just be like, you know what, I don't even care no more. It's my business. Well, how about you do your thing and I do mine?
It's what more and more young girls across the country are saying. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
A Whitehorse nonprofit called Northerners Taking Flight is giving wings to Northern pilots. It wants to get more Northern pilots in the air with local aviation education. Alcan Air announced last week it'll transfer its flight training unit to the nonprofit. The executive director says there's a major pilot shortage in Canada and not many chances for Northerners to get into the industry at home.
The new non-for-profit is bringing is having many different aviation operators around the table. So there's Air North, there's Air Tindy, Alcan Air, Canadian North. So from across all 3 territories, which is pretty cool, I have to
what's
say.
the benefit of having that, do you think?
Because they all have interest in seeing Northerners taking flight being successful, right? Because all of the operators need pilots, they all need AMEs, they all need flight attendants. So the idea is to develop education in aviation to support the industry.
Ziegler says as a nonprofit, Northerners Taking Flight will have greater access to funding and sponsorships. Butchering a moose is a lot of work, but it has a big payoff. In Dawson City, Yukon, a handful of elders are spending the week butchering moose meat donated by local outfitters. The program is run by the Trondequetchin First Nation and the Dawson District Renewable Resource Council. Take a look.
Like all of my aunties and uncles and everyone would always come together and butcher a moose. And today it seems that like people are so busy and there's so many things pulling at people's attention and really like try and get their time. So being able to see people come together again, I feel is very valuable. See how on the top there, that's all. So yeah, the workshop was on from Monday to Thursday. Today we're quartering. We have the quarters that was donated from the outfitters, and today we're just kind of like butchering the quarters and then cubing it so that we could grind it into sausages later this afternoon.
It's a big task. It's fun though, a lot of smiles so far. And at the end of the week, everybody gets to go home with a big box of, sausages, burgers, stew meat. So it's pretty good. A lot of groups coming together to do this. Outfitters, the Renewable Resources Council, Trondequetchin. And it's like a community thing. And I think especially when you're harvesting something like a moose, I think it's always a good idea to think about the community instead of kind of your own personal needs. So for me personally, that's what I like people getting out of this workshop.
And that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, go to cbc.ca/north. Thank you for watching. I'm Megan Roberts. Have a good night.
Which insects are serially monogamous?
I'm just curious.
Can love help us live longer?
I feel alive!
Does heartbreak make music better?
I love this music.
Could AI compose the next masterpiece of our time?
Robot composers conducting robot music.
Do you really need to wait 30 minutes after eating before swimming? And why is something as big as time kept in something as small as a watch?
Whoa, that's heavy.
When you get curious, you get CBC.
You're going to be introduced to a new world. Stand back.
I think my dislike is warranted. What was Amy calling it? The beef wars?
You don't tell me anything. You don't share your feelings, open up about your past.
It's not that simple, Amy.